The following show is a Pod Avenue production.
This is the Young Bucks.
And you're listening to the This Is Awesome Wrestling Show. Too sweet me.
And we're back. This is Awesome Wrestling Show, back in the saddle once again. I am your host, Glenn Moore, and be joining you each and every week on This is Awesome Wrestling Show. I am very enthusiastic about bringing the show back, a show that, started in 2014. In the fall of 2014, very first guest, Jerry the King Lawler, and from there, over 100 episodes recorded, a ton of guests throughout the time span of the podcast, from Terry Funk to Badass Billy Gunn to Booker T to Seth Rollins to Sasha Banks, and I know I left a ton of people off the list, but it's good to be back in the saddle for This Is Awesome Wrestling Show. And now, I don't want to be sitting here each and every week critiquing WWE for an hour. I feel like there's enough podcasts that do that, and I kind of want to be different and to be able to utilize some of the contacts that I've established over the years to do some interviews. And I know we've done a ton of interviews, a lot of people, but I feel like bringing a new person on the show as an interview will keep the listeners' attention. And the first guest for the return of the new season of This Is Awesome Wrestling Show is Magnum CK. He is an independent wrestler, has been in the business for many, many years, is just making his mark in AIW up here in Cleveland, Ohio, but that's how I first was introduced to Magnum CK, and I am enthusiastic about having him on the show this week. The interview is over an hour long, and we just, my interview style is I do a little bit of show prep. I have a little bit of bullet points that I do want to have, noticed in the interview or taken down, and I do have some bullet points that I, jot down before the interview. But it's basically shooting the shit with my guest, and that's how I want to conduct these interviews. Is just let it go. And once the interview seems to be fading, that's when we cut it off. And Magnum CK and I could have probably went 3 or 4 more hours, but I'd love to have him back on the show very, very shortly. But we went an hour, and that will be this week's interview. I know a lot of people listening probably unsubscribed to the This Is Awesome Wrestling Show, the RSS feed and iTunes and Stitcher, and rightfully so. I mean, I don't blame you for doing that, because the show was inactive for a long time. But all the episodes are still available to listen to, and you should definitely resubscribe. And for a lot of people probably coming over from my other wrestling podcast with Jerry the King Lawler called Dinner with the King, hit the subscribe button. We're on iTunes, we're on Stitcher. All the links are on podavenue.com/TIAWS. You can find the social media. We're on Twitter at TIA Wrestling. So plenty of ways to follow the show. I mainly do wrestling views on my on the Twitter and TIA Wrestling, like during pay-per-views and whatnot. Start getting back to the flow of that. But I'm excited. And I mentioned this with the interview with Magnum CK, was kind of lost my podcast smile. Just lost the desire to do it. And this is even before the show kind of officially was on life support. Late 2016 is just, even when doing those shows were like pulling teeth. And, we had, decent numbers for a few shows, and then some shows were absolutely terrible. But I'm excited to bring the show back. Like I said, I feel like, doing an interview style podcast would be great for fans of certain wrestlers, independent, but also more that are known nationally, internationally, coming on the show to get to know them a little bit more and to basically talk like, hey, we're sitting at a restaurant or a bar and just having a conversation with my guests. So that's how it is with Magnum CK this week. Just really quick, a couple of years ago, we had scheduled Daniel Bryan to be on the show, and it was through his book tour. When his book came out a couple of years ago, and the publisher was like, yeah, we're going to get Daniel Bryan on the show. We're going to send you a couple of books, which they did. We got a couple of books out of it. And it just kept getting pushed back, the interview date. Oh, he can't do this day. He can't do this day. And then eventually, oh, well, he's not doing interviews anymore. So for that reason, do I care if Daniel Bryan's back in the WWE? Good for him. But we're still waiting for that interview, Daniel. Still waiting for that interview. Of course, Ronda Rousey's in WWE, which is absolutely great. And people who have followed me on Twitter for a while, or just know me personally, or even listen to Dinner with the King, I've told my Ronda Rousey story from hanging out with her a couple of years ago in AIW and here in Cleveland. So I'm happy to see her in WWE, happy to see her probably get the main event at WrestleMania, and hopefully it's a great show. Speaking of WrestleMania, I will not be going to WrestleMania. This is kind of like my protest of what the current state of WWE is. And even though Rousey's in WWE, I just don't feel like it's worth my money to go down to New Orleans and go to WrestleMania. So, yeah, I will not be going. But I'll be watching all 8 hours of it on the WWE network. So that'll be fun. But I will not be attending. This is my first time I'm not going. Well, I went to Texas for a day and had to come back. Did not go to there. So it's going to be the first time not being in the city of WrestleMania for that weekend. Since 2000, I was there for 2012, 13. So it's going to be 6 years. So it's going to be different, celebrating WrestleMania for the whole week at home. But New Orleans is a great city to party in. 2014 was terrific when it comes to going down to WrestleMania. So I hope anybody who listens who is going to New Orleans for WrestleMania has a blast. Hit up Bourbon Street, hit up the WB Access, and hit up all the events that are surrounding the city when it comes to WrestleMania weekend. So I will not be going, but I will be tweeting about it, keeping a close eye. But this is kind of like I'm just not feeling it. It doesn't feel like WrestleMania season. And I know Daniel Bryan's back, and you have to see a match of probably him and Shane versus Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn. But it just doesn't feel like WrestleMania season. And I don't know why it feels that way. It just feels like everything has been put together late and just hasn't really piqued my interest. So, if The Rock was going to team up with Ronda Rousey, The Rock he's fabulous. So I would definitely be going down to New Orleans if The Rock was teaming with Ronda Rousey. Enough, you can't take that away from Kurt Angle. I love Kurt Angle, but just not the same as The Rock. So, and if Biker Taker comes back, I might have to adjust my plans for that weekend to go down to New Orleans for WrestleMania. I have to call in a favor to Jerry Lawler because Biker Taker would definitely. How fans in the business, or how wrestlers say about fans, I would definitely mark out for Biker Taker. So, but who knows? I guess we'll see. Raw will be in Cleveland. I will not be going to Raw in Cleveland either. This is like, I'm just taking a definitive stance against WWE. And it's like, well, if you don't like the Browns, don't buy tickets and go. So this is like my thing. I'm not going to, to be honest, I haven't paid for a ticket in a while. But if you don't go, you're not there. So anybody who does go, enjoy the show. It's just my mini protest. Let me have my protest. Aren't protests the thing nowadays? You can protest on every little thing, get upset. So I'm protesting WWE for this WrestleMania season. Maybe I'll be back next year. Next year is going to be in New York. That's fantastic. I love my experience in New York for WrestleMania. What was it? 30. Which WrestleMania was that? 29? Yeah, 29, 2013. Love my experience there. So definitely be going back to New York for WrestleMania. The whole weekend is just great. And I love New York City. So that'd be great. All right. That's enough about me talking about WWE and whatnot. And I'm really, really excited about offering you this interview with Magnum CK. And don't forget to listen to Dinner with the King, myself and Jerry the King Lawler each and every week. 50 episodes in. Basically, we take a topic from his career. We talk about several people that have impacted the career of Jerry the King Lawler. And we talk about current WWE news, current wrestling news. We have some guests on, from Terry Funk to Jim Cornette to Bret Hart to Cody Rhodes. So you never know who might come on. Jeff Jarrett was just recently on. So when we have an interview, we make sure it's impactful and relevant to what we're talking about that week. So Dinner with the King, just search Dinner with the King, Jerry Lawler on Google, and you'll find all the links to iTunes and Stitcher and YouTube and whatnot. So I really appreciate you guys. Check out that podcast as well. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy my interview with Magnum CK. All right, my guest this week on the return of the This Is Awesome Wrestling show is a man that became, well, I would say my favorite indie wrestler when I went to an AIW show late last year, and absolutely fell in love with the glamour and just the character of this man, even before he got into the ring. But he is known. He's making the podcast rounds. I figured I'd have him on mine while he's still making the rounds. Is Magnum CK. I am honored to have you on the show, my friend.
Oh, the honor's all mine, and I don't think I can live up to that introduction, so it's been a pleasure being here, and I'll catch you guys next time. I really appreciate it, man. That is true. I'm making the podcast rounds, and then eventually I'll run out of stories, and then have to go make some new ones, I guess.
That's the thing with making the podcast rounds, is that everybody and the mother has a wrestling podcast, and if you do one, you got to do them all. So.
Well, that's the cool thing about it is, like, I don't know, I'm a podcast person. I'm a podcast connoisseur, I suppose. I subscribe to like 80 of them or something, but the wrestling ones, a lot of them can be like really repetitive, but I've been pretty lucky. I feel like the ones I've been on, they've at least gone different directions. Now, I don't know if that's just because I don't want to say the same thing on every one of them, or if it's just the hosts or what. But yeah, I mean, the more you dive into like real life and stuff, there's a lot more to talk about other than just like headlocks and stuff.
Do you know? I'll let you guess how many wrestling podcasts I listen to. And obviously, you're a fan of Dinner with the King with Jerry Lawler and I. So. But how many wrestling podcasts do you think I listen to on a weekly basis?
So this feels like a trick question, because it's either going to be like, you're either going to surprise me and be like 28, or you're going to be like 0. So, so I got to go low or high, I think, on this one. I'm going to say that you're going for the surprise, and you're going to be like, I actually don't listen to any wrestling podcasts.
You are correct, sir. I don't listen to any other wrestling podcasts. I used to. But it's been about, I would say, 4 or 5 months till I really had, a full wrestling podcast in my ears. I don't know. I just don't. I do one, and I've done one for 3 years, and it's just, you're right. It's become repetitive, I feel like.
Well, it's also true, like, when you spend, like, if you work at a certain place, you don't want to go in there on your day off, like, for years and years, I was a personal trainer at a gym while I was wrestling, and because it was a really flexible, cool job. But sometimes at the end of the day, like after like 7 or 8 hours of training people, the last thing you want to do is work out, So I guess if you're editing and recording podcasts all the time, sometimes the last thing you'd want to do is listen to like another one.
Yeah. Well, there's some that that I would recommend to other people. It's just I don't maybe have the time, or I just I feel like it's just repetitive, and I don't want to listen to the same one. But like I said, I'm glad you're on mine. I'm glad you're on the return episode, I had to get you come on, and here I am. There I was at AIW, my first show in probably a year and a couple months, and I knew what was going on, and knew some of the storylines and some of the matches that were happening that night, but I didn't know about Magnum CK, and I went to Frankie Flynn's merch table before the show, and I haven't talked to him since I was back at AIW, and shook his hand, and I see the little Frankie, a little boy that I used to make fun of on this podcast each and every week. He grew up, and he has a beard. He has a following. He has an entourage, the production, and I was very impressed. So then the show started, and here comes this before this match, and here comes out this man with a robe, and he's walking. He's walking to the ring. His arms are stretched out, and he's walking around the ring, and there's not much room between the guardrail and the ring. And so with his outstretched hands, he has to have his arms in the crowd. He's showing total disregard for anybody who is standing near him. His hand is just whacking people on the side of the head, forcing them to move. And I immediately fell in love with this guy, and the music, not the music. Jeez, and I'm sorry I haven't been back to an AIW show. It's just I think I found what it was. Well, you told me. I had DM'd you, and you told me what it was, and I don't have my DMs pulled up, but it was just like a documentary, like trailer, somebody talking, right?
Yeah, it was. That was Frankie's idea. It was like a BBC video of like someone doing like a Shakespearean monologue. But it's funny that when you say that all that out loud, it does sound kind of ridiculous.
It's amazing.
But see, I appreciate that. A couple of weeks before that, I was I will say I don't get super nervous that much. Because I not to sound like whatever, but I've been performing in one form or another for a long time, so I'm more focused and kind of get that excited feeling more than I'm like, oh God, like, I'm so nervous. But that night I was, because I was so nervous to actually have my first match at AIW, and I really wasn't sure how the crowd was going to take me, because there are so many amazing performers that have come through there and that are currently there. And, there's always that part of you. Of course, every wrestler has a little bit of an ego, or else they wouldn't take off their clothes in front of people and think that they'd want to pay to see it. There's some sort of ego in there somewhere. But there's always that thing in the back of your mind of like, okay, is this the night that like it all comes crashing down? And they're like, oh, this guy's terrible, So that was really in the back of my mind that night. And it was a singles match too. So you're really, you're exposed. It's just you and your opponent, and you could really get exposed pretty easily. And, but I was determined to make it work. But anyway, a couple of weeks before that, I was wrestling in Ohio, somewhere in Ohio, and I can't remember exactly where. But my wife and I were set to go to New York right after the show that night, because we were going to go watch some Broadway shows, oddly. I'd gotten her some tickets. But anyway, so she came with me, and I was just feeling kind of goofy. And I was like, hey, there's this song that's on the Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman used it, and it was on that Andy Kaufman. There's this old wrestler. I don't know if you've heard of him. Not old as in age, but I mean old from like back in the day. I don't know. Maybe you've heard of him. Jerry the King Lawler. He's from Memphis. Google him if you haven't heard of him, Glenn. I don't know, but he's very famous. And there's a documentary about Andy Kaufman and Jerry Lawler called "I'm from Hollywood," and there's a song on there by the Bobs called "March and Fanfare," and it's so funny because it's like this pretentious, like royal, regal, like a cappella song. It's great. And I was like, okay, I've always wanted to use this song, and I was with my wife, so I was kind of trying to crack her up a little bit. I'm like, all right, I found a version of it that just repeats the 30-second song like over and over for like 3 minutes. So I was like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have him play this. I'm not going to tell anybody. I'm a bad guy in this town. I was going against Marion Fontaine. It was a hilariously fun night. But I was like, I'm going to play this song. I'm going to have him play this song, and I'm going to take the full time to come out. Like, I'm just going to stick out my arms, and I'm going to walk like as slowly as I possibly can, and just circle the ring as many times as I need to let that song play for like 3 minutes. And so it really got a lot of heat. It was fun and funny. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do this next week at AIW. Okay, I tested that and it worked. So I had a different song that night in Cleveland. But the funny thing was, I didn't really think about it. When I came out, the guardrail, there's a huge amount of space. So I just, I'm a tall guy, big long arms. I put my arms out and there's plenty of room, but then I got around the side of the ring and it's like 3 feet high. And I was like, and everyone, the cool thing about AIW, one of the cool things is like all the fans stand up when people make an entrance. So normally my hands would have just gone over their heads, but they're all standing up. So I'm like, well, all right, I'm turning this corner. Like I have to make a choice. Like I either have to give in and put my arms down, or just try to walk through and see what happens. And I was like, listen, I'm a bad guy. And also I'm not backing down. You move. So I made sure to stay like a slow pace and just kept walking. I was just like paintbrushing everybody, like knocking off hats and stuff. And I don't think they hadn't really seen anything like that before. So thankfully that happened, because that really kind of set the stage of, I felt like the room was with me at that point. And I think we had a really good little match anyway, but after that, I mean, that's what people talk to me about. I mean, we did a lot of cool stuff and fun stuff in that match, but really everyone's like, that entrance was great. And I was like, listen, that's fine. If I can make you remember anything, that's a plus. And I remember seeing your, cause we hadn't met, seeing your tweets and everything and just being really, really flattered by that. I thought that was really cool. But that kind of has become my thing in a weird way. So that night was really like, the whatever you would call it, like that's where I really got rolling with this character. It really kind of hit like, oh, I know what I am now. Yeah. So it was like an epiphany in a weird way. But I appreciate the kind words.
Yeah, it's one of the things, watching indie wrestling. All these young guys, they really, and I know you're not young in the business, but I mean other people that are just getting started out and they're so worried about the next move or the next spot, and they're practicing, this and that they forget to connect with the fans, either if they're a heel or a face. They forget to connect with the crowd. And if you can hook a fan before you even throw a punch, I mean, you're doing it right. And that was the one thing that stuck out is, you have this BBC, some guy reading Shakespeare coming out, and you have the robe, and you're paintbrushing everybody as you walk to the ring. I mean, you won me over, and I'm sure you won a lot of people over that night before you even got in the ring. And you're a great wrestler too. So when you add that in, you have the total package. So I would keep continuing to do what you do before you even get in the ring, because I feel like it's a lost art with people who are trying to get into wrestling or even make their mark in wrestling, as they forget to be somebody, have a persona, have a personality before you even throw a punch.
Oh man, yeah, I really appreciate that. And it's funny because I agree with everything you said, especially the compliments, but it is true. It's like, worldwide, who wrestles for AIW is just one of the coolest, like most interesting, nicest dudes. And he kind of paid me a similar compliment where he's like, you're not worried about like, oh my gosh, I have to get this crazy dangerous move in or whatever. You're more concerned about like, okay, well, how do we connect and tell this story? And then I also try to be as they call a good worker as well. I try to work hard and adapt to everybody I'm in there with too. So I think that's important, because that sucks when someone has like a ton of charisma, or something, and then you watch them work and you're like, oh, okay. So I try not to have like any ends that sag. I try to cover it all if I can, or do the best that I can. But yeah, I totally agree. Like if people know what you are the first 5 seconds they see you. There's another very famous wrestler you may have heard of named Ric Flair. I think he talks about that, where that first 5 seconds is crucial, because that's when the crowd decides whether or not they believe that you believe. Like if you walk out and you seem unsure, it's like, oh, this guy, who cares? But Rick, the Nature Boy, walks out and you're like, dude, that guy knows what he is and he believes it more than anyone that's building. So then you buy into it. So I've tried to really take all the great advice that I've ever gotten and use it in some way. Like I just got some notes back. I had the very good fortune to wrestle in front of William Regal and Gabe Sapolsky from WWN, Evolve and all that. And he sent me some really, really nice notes, and he was even like, I love your charisma. Take it even further, keep going, push. He's like, you're very animated in the ring, be more animated. I'm like, okay, like Gabe said, like like, you know, I'm gonna go overboard now. Like
You have to.
he
now,
knows
yeah.
a few things. Yeah, he knows a few things about wrestling, and I'm like, okay, well, I was doing all the Terry Funk type stuff before, but we're just gonna turn it up, man.
That's great. I mean, that's the thing. It's just you know, having, you know, previously on the previous 103 episodes of the show, we've had, you know, Terry Funk, Jerry Lawler, Dangerous Doug Gilbert, you know, some old school indie guys and old school guys that made their mark past the indie scene, you know, 70s and 80s, and you talk to them about being a heel and connecting with the crowd. I mean, Tracy Smothers, you know, still gets booked now. I mean, the man can barely walk from his car to the locker room, but he goes to the ring, and he instantly gets heat from the crowd for just working the mic, being the persona. And yeah, he can't wrestle for half an hour now, but he has that persona. He gets a crowd reaction. I see too many guys that are so worried about doing flippy stuff and trying to do the next spot to get a reaction from the crowd, that if they would have connected with their persona before, then they would have gotten the reaction with all their spots they're trying to do. It seems like I said, it seems to be a lost art, and that only few can carry, and that's carry a persona and introduce yourself to a crowd and still be able to garner a reaction that you want.
Well, my thing always is, and I have quite a few thoughts on that, but my thing always is I try to approach every crowd as if it's the first time I've ever approached them. Like I never assume, oh, they remember me, I can just take it easy on. It's like, no, it's a new show. It's been a month. Maybe it's been 3 months, or maybe I've never even been here before. I have to start over, you know, I have to start again. And I can certainly build on things I've done in the past, but it's like, no, it's fresh, man. That first of all, they've probably already seen 6 matches anyway. So, you know, it's time to reset, you know, I have to introduce them to me again. And as far as, you know, the flips and moves and everything, my only thought on that is, you know, I think high spots are fantastic, and they're what make wrestling exciting. But my thing that I always try to tell, I'm very fortunate in that I've had a lot of experience and been given a lot of knowledge kind of passed down. So one thing I try to share with some of the younger talents that I work with is, you know what, because I see guys in the back, I've seen it on shows where they're trying to clip people's wings, you know, where it's like, oh no, don't do that, brother, just stand there, don't do anything. And it's like, oh, I mean, I get the idea, but at the same time, it's like, we have to be excited. You know, I'm 6'4" and like 270 or whatever I am, and I'm still doing like the Ric Flair flip over the top, you know, to the outside. Just I'm trying to do as much as I can to give them something, because I try to be simple but not lazy, right? You know. So my thing about it is, those spots are fantastic. Please keep them, but we need to take them from spots and turn them into moments, right? And a moment has a beginning and a middle and an end, or a transition, you know. So it's like, I do the top rope elbow as a finisher, just because I love Randy Savage, you know, and I just think no one was really doing it at the time. And I always try to think that direction, like, what's everyone doing? And I'm like, well, what's a simple thing that like my big ass could get up and do? And it's like, oh, wow. Like to see me fly through the air sideways and like the Macho Man pose is kind of impressive in a way. So I've been on shows where other guys have done that as a finish, like on the same show. And then I'll watch their match before mine, and they will do this top rope elbow, which, by the way, like is a lot, really. Like, it's your side of your body crashing down on the mat, and you're right onto an opponent's chest. Like, it can be, there's little room for error when it comes to something like that. You can really hurt yourself or somebody else. And I've definitely hurt my back, you know, for weeks at a time, just by landing a little the wrong way. And I've gotten a lot better at it, but doing the move, not hurting my back. But you know, and I see a guy do that move like 3 matches before me and not get a reaction. And I'm like, man, I really just, it's hard to explain, but it's like, man, I don't know how to tell you to fix it, but it just felt like you did it at the wrong time and you didn't really build it up. So I always try to like put moves like that in certain spots where it's like, okay, if I did this in the beginning of the match or in the middle or something, it might not have meant very much, but I'll say the first time I hit that elbow in Cleveland, for AIW, I was really surprised at the reaction I got, because I mean, there are people that do way more impressive things than that in that building. I mean, even on that night, and a couple of the guys even commented, and I really attribute it to, like, I built to it, and even when I was going up to do it, I tried to make it feel like, okay, guys, this is going to be something special. Whether I hit it or miss it, you should probably take a picture or watch or something, because it's not really a move to come out of nowhere. It's one of those moves that's like he's climbing up and he's either going to crash and burn or he's going to kill this guy. But either way, I can't wait to see what happens. And I guess just because I'm so big, it's always so damn loud. That doesn't hurt either. But I just think that there's something to that. It's like whether it was an elbow or whether it was like a front flip dragon Karana to the outside, where it is and how you present it matters. I've seen guys lock up, go to the corner and do like a Canadian destroyer off the top. Like, no lie. Like, I've seen that happen. Lock up, Canadian destroyer, 1-2 kick out, circle, lock up again. I've seen it happen. And that Canadian destroyer got absolutely zero reaction because it was like, well, what? All right. Yeah. Well, okay. So we climax now. And what do we do?
That's the thing. That's what kind of like my pet peeves is trying to do these big spots, but you're trying to do 2, 3, or 4 at a time in a row, just getting no reaction. And like you said, there has to be a climax to the match, and having that spot at the right time of the match will make sure you get the most from the crowd. And people don't get that. They think that if they do 5 splashes off the top rope or do a Canadian destroyer, the crowd's going to love them, and that's only a quarter of the battle is doing the moves. You got to have the persona and the charisma, and that's why I wanted you to come on. Is I wanted to talk to you, but also, learn a little bit about you, the person behind Magnum CK, because I know there's a long history of wrestling when it comes to you personally. And I read the story on, I think it was a pwmania.com. That's where I found and read your whole basically career and your life and whatnot. I mean, you have. Here I thought that Magnum CK was just a guy starting out a couple of years, but there's a long history of just you, the person, in wrestling.
Yeah, I grew up around it. My uncle was a wrestler, and he still promotes a bit. He lives down in West Virginia now, but he promotes like around the Pennsylvania, West Virginia border, around that area. But yeah, I totally grew up. I mean, I literally grew up around Wahoo McDaniel and Lord Zoltan and Ivan Koloff. I mean, and Chris Hamrick, these guys, and then, Bobby Blaze, Ricky Morton. Like, I grew up around these guys. It's crazy. So wrestling just always was kind of this ubiquitous thing. It was just all around me all the time. And it just consumed my thoughts. I mean, I sat in class and, drew wrestling logos for wrestling leagues and came up with characters and stuff. And I just thought about it all the time. And, to get to do it, it's funny because my first time around in wrestling, I was very young. It was just when I turned 18, I started training. And I lasted about 4 years, almost 5, somewhere around there. And I got to do a lot of cool things. I mean, I definitely made my way around as much as I could, but it really was just a numbers game and just kind of like I lost some of my road buddies that I was riding the shows with, it's kind of separated, and I just couldn't afford to do it. And I just got kind of depressed about it, because I felt like I was hitting my head against the wall. I was like, man, because I can tell you what I was trying to do, like with hindsight, is I was trying to be what I thought, TNA or Ring of Honor or whoever it may be would want me to be, but I was totally going the wrong direction. I wasn't networking. I wasn't really being original. I wasn't coming up with my own stuff, which is weird now because that's like all I think about now. But so I got away from it, and I just had some personal problems and everything, and I was struggling, dude. I mean, I was sleeping on friends' couches, and I was really having a rough time. I didn't really have a place to live or go, and then I kind of got my life together, and all that, and I had a first marriage, and that didn't last very long, and I found just the best person, the love of my life, man. She's the best. And she heard me, we'd been friends for a few years. And when we finally got together, we both were in other marriages. We got divorced and got together. And she would hear me talking about wrestling. And it was one day I remember it was Thanksgiving. We were visiting her family in Cincinnati. It was Thanksgiving 2015. And she's like, you're not done with this. Like, I see it like in your eyes when you talk about wrestling, just like the longing and sadness of like, man. And I told her, like, I wish I would have stuck with, or I wish, I would have figured it out or something. I wish things had worked out differently, because what I did wasn't bad necessarily. I went into theater. I studied at Second City in Chicago. I lived up there. I mean, I kept busy, and I learned how to be a performer. I learned how to work in front of an audience. I mean, tens of thousands of hours of performing, and I've been a lead in over 20 plays and musicals. I've directed. I studied and performed improv in Chicago, and like the most famous theater in Chicago for improv. So I definitely kept busy, and I learned my craft. And I never forget it. I went down. We at my sister-in-law's. We sleep they have a finished basement. It's really nice. And I went down there, and I took out my phone, and I messaged Adam Johnson. He runs a place called Remix Pro Wrestling in Marietta, Ohio. They run a couple of shows a year, big shows. And I said they had one coming up in April. It just happened to be on my birthday in 2016. And I said, this is a weird question, but how would you feel about me coming back to wrestling? And he said, can you work April 9th? And I said, yes, I can. He's like, you're on. And then I was, yeah, because he's just been, because I'd done commentary for him, and I'd helped him with The Office, like paying some of the guys and writing some of their shows. So I'd have been involved, but just no hesitation. And I, aside from my wife starting me down that road again, I owe a lot to Adam just for being like, yes, sir, come on down. And then, I had the general wave of excitement. Oddly enough, I was wearing a Sting shirt at the time, like an 80s Sting shirt. I just remember that for some reason. But the wave of like excitement hit me. And then like the feeling in my stomach of like, dude, what'd you do? Like, like what? So within like a week, I'd contacted Mike Quackenbush up in Philadelphia. Yeah. And, he had some classes you could just roll into. And I didn't tell anybody. He didn't know who I was. And I didn't tell Ophidian was his head trainer at the time, or one of them. Drew Gulick, actually, who's on TV now, was his head trainer. But anyway, I didn't tell them who I was, or that I was a wrestler or anything. And then I started showing up to the classes and stuff. And like the third class, Ophidian's like, he pulled me aside. He's like, is my wife making you some gear? And I was like, yeah, as a matter of fact, I think she is. He's like, I knew you were a wrestler. Like, because like, I show up and it's like all these different levels, and I'm like taking these big back bumps and like no fear and like fun flipping and doing all these rolls and flips and stuff. But they got me, man. They got the rust off of me like fast. And I can tell you, I know I'm long-winded, but on April 9th, it was my birthday. We were first match on the show, and there's about 800 plus fans there. It was crazy. And I remember walking out. I was the first one to come out. I came out, got in the ring, looked around. I hadn't figured out the whole cape and the Magnum CK and all that thing yet, so I didn't have a character to use or anything. I was just me. And I looked around and I was like, you idiot, this is a stage. This is theater. You've done this a million times. And literally all my worries just like fell out of my head. Like it was just gone. We started the match. It was an 8-9 minute match. It went great. And ever since then, I've kind of looked at it. It's like, dude, it's just a square stage. Like you fall different than you do on stage, or, it hurts a lot more than theater does, but it's literally just theater, with all the sports elements too, and all the real pain, I guess. But, and ever since then, it's just been like 100 miles an hour.
That's right. That's great. Cause I envy anybody who's in wrestling, anybody who could take a bump from a weird body all the way up to the legends, guys that are in the ring and take a bump. And I envy, because I would dream of having a match, of being a wrestler, even for one match. And I told myself I would love to do that. And I think my time has passed, my friend.
It's one of those things where like, it's just unlike anything else in the world. And I've talked to my wife about this, because I could be having a terrible day, man, just a terrible time. But when I show up at the show, and even the drive, I've had some terrible drives, and here's the funny thing. I hate driving. I hate traveling. But when I get to the show and I start shaking everyone's hand and putting my bags down and setting up the table and everything, like, my gosh, my mood just changes like 180 degrees if I'm having a bad day. And I'm so happy, because I realize not only is this finite. I mean, it could end. My next match could be my last one. And that's just the truth of it. I mean, anything can happen. But it's just so special, and I just really, because the first time I didn't appreciate it. And this time around, I've had much more success internally, because I've just approached it as like, dude, everything you do in this is just icing on the cake, because I came back and I had the right attitude, and I've really done some cool things and wrestled some really legitimately legendary people. But so everything I do after this is just just extra, because and I keep pushing for all that. I want all that too, but I'm just so happy to be there. And I think if you're anything but happy to be in that locker room, then maybe it's time to go. Because I was just in a locker room with Mick Foley last weekend up in Toronto, and he was the happiest guy there. Like he was more excited than everybody. So, and Ricky Steamboat, I was just on a show with him, and I'll be on a show with him again here in a couple of months. He's more excited to be there than any of the 20-year-old guys that are there, So I think you have to remember always what you love about it. And I always think, like, when I'm doing my stuff out there, I always think, like, would 8-year-old me be enjoying this? Because I always loved the bad guys when I was a kid. And I'm like, dude, yeah, he'd probably think this is pretty cool. All right, yeah, you're doing a good job.
For the past, I know you don't know the backstory of the Frankie Flynn Glenn Moore feud that took place a couple of years ago. But when Frankie was first starting out, he was this little kid in red trunks going out to the ring, and he battled the likes of, I think, had a nice little feud with Eddie Kingston. But I bashed Frankie Flynn. I did not like Frankie Flynn. Anytime I had a chance to bash him on the show, I would. We would not allow him on the podcast. I think he made one appearance with Blue Pants. We forced him to serenade Blue Pants, and he live on the podcast, and he totally dropped the ball. I think he liked Blue Pants, and he just totally dropped the ball when it came to serenading. Yeah. So we kind of tried to, well, I did, try to make fun of him over and over. But when I went to AIW, this is the night that I saw your AIW debut, Frankie Flynn grew up. And I want to know, how did Frankie get you and Derek Direction and a couple other guys to be the production? I mean, how did that all come about after Frankie Flynn having this entourage, this new world order, so to speak, for in the AIW, but also some other promotions around the area. But how did that come about with you and Frankie Flynn?
Well, I think just like I mentioned, how I kind of found my character and it just clicked, and it's an ever evolving thing. If you care about it, it is anyway. Because I didn't know Frankie back then, but I see he still has some of his old pictures, and I'm like, that looks like a different dude. Like, yeah. He has that beard and his whole getup and everything now, and he has this like presence when he comes out, and it just clicks at some point. So I think they have like the Back to the Future Cup or something like that. And that's when he had his kind of coming out party of just like this character and everything. And it just immediately started resonating with the fans. And it's really cool to see when, not only for myself when it happened to me, but just to see other guys just kind of understand like, oh, this is what I am, and just put the pedal down and go for it. So when the original idea, the whole production thing came from John Thorne, and his whole thing was, let's bring in a bigger guy with Frankie to kind of be his like Big Daddy Cool type character, was the original idea. And John, I don't know that John had really seen much of my work before, because I was still kind of doing like some tag team stuff and here and there. But when Biggins got sick, I'd known Biggins from before, my first time around in wrestling, and he and I had reconnected, thankfully, through Facebook online, and we talked about, oddly enough, podcasts, and we kept in touch, and he had recommended some really good ones for me, and then we'd talk about it, and I would be like, oh, have you heard this one? Oh, no, man, cool, or just kind of, just shoot around every once in a while. And so we were at a Remix Pro Wrestling show, oddly enough, when Biggins got really sick there right before the end. And I didn't even know this part of the story until John shared it on the AIW podcast. But, I was getting ready to leave, and I saw John standing there, and I just started talking to him. And I had never really talked to him much before. And we probably stood and talked for 20 or 25 minutes. And I'm not one of those people who's always like trying to like finagle my way into a spot. Like especially when you're
put me over, brother. Put me over.
Well, right. Especially when you're a successful promoter, I am sure that every message you get and every interaction is someone lobbying for a job. But honestly, I was on my way out the door. I just stopped with him and I just talked to him, human to human, and just as a buddy. and I just talked about Chandler with him for a few minutes, and then we just kind of joked around about a couple of things, and I just was kind of aware of the fact that knowing as many promoters as I've known, they just get accosted sometimes. And I was like, I just want to talk to him, like this Chandler thing was everyone was getting, they had announced at the beginning of the show how he wasn't doing well. And by all accounts, they didn't know if he was going to be alive when they got back to Cleveland. It was one of those really rough patches that he had there right before the end. And so I just had a human conversation with him. And I guess he remembered that. And then a few months later, they said, oh, we need a big guy. And he was just like, he remembered me, and he was just like, shot me the message. But here's the funny thing about it is I remember where I was when he messaged me, because it's a big deal. AIW is something that's very important to me. And he sent me the date, and it was the last Saturday of a contracted Hairspray performance that I'd been cast in Hairspray in like a paid acting gig or whatever. And it was the last night, and I couldn't. If I missed that, I would have had to have given back all the money. And AIW is very successful, but like a summer theater show pays very well. I was like, I don't think John Thorne's planning on paying me as much as this summer I was like, I was stuck. I was so sad. And I just told him, because he sent me the dates for the rest of the year, and I was like, I can make all of them except this one. And he's like, that's Absolution. And I was like, I know, and I want to die. I'm so sorry. And they had like Arn Anderson there and everything, and I was like, oh my God. And I thought, well, there goes my AIW shot. But dude, he was just the coolest guy, because he was just like, all right, you know what? I think it's still going to work. No worries. Thank you, and I'll see you in September, or whatever it was. And I was like, oh my God, like what a relief. And then so because that happened, they rolled in Derek Direction. They made him Derek Director, and Colby Red at the time to join the group at Absolution. And then I came at the next show, Cold as Ice. So again, all this came out of the head of John Thorne, man. And people, I've gotten a lot of feedback from people about the production, and a lot of, all positive that I've heard anyway. And I was just in Toronto, and some fans up there were asking me about it, which is just crazy to think about. It's just kind of the reach of AIW. And they were like, they were just talking about how unique they thought it was. And they're like, how do you guys, wow, like good for you guys for doing all that. And I was like, listen, here's the thing. The company's behind it. You know what I mean? Like that's half of it. They give us the space to perform it. Like they've really given us a good solid amount of time on every show. They've really pushed us well, and they give us freedom to kind of come up with a lot of stuff. So again, that's just an attribute of a good promoter in my estimation. So I look forward to every show I have up there. I've said it a million times. I'll fight for my spot on AIW until the bitter end. I love it. It's just, I've never gotten reactions like that anywhere else, and they're just it's a really cool family. So I'm really happy to be a part of it, honestly.
Yeah, and this Friday there's a show up here in Cleveland, Gauntlet for the Gold, and it's going to feature a legend, a man that's going to be in the Hall of Fame, WWE Hall of Fame, inducted this year. Is Jeff Jarrett. Double J is going to be up there. But you're going to be in the main event, buddy.
I know. I will say, like, I don't mind. I never get too protective about talking about getting excited about wrestling. Like, I've heard guys talk about, like, oh, no, wrestlers can't. They're not allowed to get excited. They act too cool. I am not too cool. I will say, every time a match graphic goes up from, like, AIW, I'm like, oh, my God, this is the coolest. And then when I saw because it's not like you get a notification or a message like, hey, match graphic coming up. So I just literally hopped on Twitter, and I saw that either John Thorne or AIW's page had said main event this Friday. And I was like, oh, cool. I wonder what, because I know they'd already announced the title match. And I was like, oh, it must be the other title. And then I saw my picture on it, and I was like, wait. Like, it was like that moment where I was like, I had to reread it and be like, wait, what? Like, awesome, And so that's their big like Rumble style deal. So I'm really excited to be a part of that. Those can be a lot of fun. So again, the the exposure that AIW has gotten me has been just, again, icing on the cake. I mean, I would love to be up there even if they didn't have such great exposure and everything, but just because it's such a fun crowd. That crowd, I mean, you've been there, you've been in the crowd. I mean, they're very with it. They're very gracious, you know, and they play along, and they react, and they're paying attention. So, man, that's half of it sometimes. Just having a crowd who wants to be there, you know.
Yeah, it's great. So Friday, you're up here in Cleveland for AIW. It's going to be a main event. It's going to be great. I just like I said, I haven't been to AIW since the show that I saw your debut for AIW, and just like I said, I think the production is great with Frankie Flynn, and I think he needs to be the bad guy. He needs to have a group around him too. But I'm very, very happy with seeing you in the production, and I love Derek direction as well. Frankie, I've come around him. Hey, Frankie Flynn, I'm a fan. I'm gonna say right now, first time on this podcast, I'm a fan of Frankie Flynn, and keep the beard. He's not wrestling in pants. He's now in pants, so he's taking the advice of me to wear pants. His legs are way too white to be in trunks. But no, I think it's a great group, and hopefully, John and AIW, pushes you guys to the moon, because you guys are very, very effective as a group.
Well, I appreciate that, but we're breaking down barriers here. First episode back, and we already got a Frankie Flynn endorsement. Wow.
Yeah, I know, man. If you listen to the last maybe 100, I would curse Frankie Flynn. But no, I'm not sure if he still has hit the subscribe button for the fan. I know you listen to the show, and he would always know when I would rip on him. And whenever I come to the show, he always give me a side eye before I would shake his hand. You gotta shake the guy's hand at least. But I mean, it's it's one of those things. But I feel like he's he's doing his thing. Has you as backup, Derek direction. A couple other guys. The group is just terrific. And I'm not sure if I'm going to be on the show Friday, but if I do, like I said, I'll be your number one fan, buddy.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's funny because you always find out, like, if anybody says anything bad about you or negative or, criticizes you, somehow somebody always tells you. Because I remember there was one podcast, and I can't remember off the top of my head which one it was, but some guy out there was complaining. I'd posted a promo, and it was a couple of minutes long because it needed to be, just kind of called for that. And he's like, and I really put a lot of effort into it, and camera angles and all this stuff. And all the other hosts were like, oh man, like I loved it. It was so great. And one guy's like, yeah, I saw that it was like 3 minutes long. I was like, I just X'd it out. I don't have time for that crap in my life. Way too long. And I remember thinking, like, I'm going to get The Great Gatsby, and I'm going to live stream reading it. I'm going to tag him in it. And I was just like, I'm just going to read for like 6 hours. And then I was like, wait a minute. Who's the rib really on here? Like, I got to sit there and read a book for 6 hours. Forget this guy.
I did see a video you do. I forgot the amount of impersonations you do. What was it, 35 or something?
I can't remember. Honestly, I think it was last summer, and I just got really bored one day, and I was like, let me just see how many I can do. I don't know.
Well, you did a Roddy Piper one, and you got a shout out from his family, right?
Yeah, well, Dave Marquez. I always try to drop his name. He's a good friend of mine from out California way. I was at the Arnold Classic. I was wrestling on a show there, and they had these bagpipers, and they were just warming up right beside our locker room area. And so I thought, I was walking by to go to the bathroom, and I was like, oh man, what could I record in front of these bagpipes? And I was just like, oh, well, duh, like Roddy Piper. So I was like, don't blow no more smoke in my face, Mr. Downey. And then, which is like the slower Piper. Then you have, just when you think you got all the answer, I changed the questions now, young fella. And then, so I posted it. And Dave Marquez is like, what do you think, Kitty? Roddy's wife. And she shared it on the page and was like, uncanny, unbelievable. And I was like, oh my God, like it just made little stuff like that makes your day. You're not really expecting it.
Dude, but when you just did that, I thought you were playing a soundbite.
Well,
amazing.
Here's what it comes from. I can tell you, I think I just have the ear for it anyway, but literally just watching wrestling over and over and over. Like I remember even as a young adult, like the Roddy Piper DVD came out like 2006 or something. And I had a thing where I could hook up a DVD player and record. Is before I could do like MP3s and stuff. And I could record onto a cassette deck of all things. And I would record Roddy Piper or Ric Flair or whoever promos. And I would just listen to them because that's just what I like to hear. Is my favorite wrestlers talk. And I think it just got ingrained into my mind.
I had a chance to interview Piper, about I think it was 5 years ago, and he was doing a promotional media calls for Wrestlers versus Zombies.
Oh, okay.
The movie. You ever heard of that movie?
Yeah.
Okay, so he was.
They filmed that partially in my old hometown.
Okay, yeah. So they were doing the Capitol Theater up here in Cleveland. They were showing it, and Hacksaw Jim Duggan was he was here. Shane Douglas was also up here. But Piper was the one doing like media calls, and I was working for the Plain Dealer, and they, wanted to do an interview, and I'm a big wrestling fan. I'm like, of course. And so I had Roddy on the phone for about 20 minutes, and he sounded he didn't sound like himself. It was really hard to get through. Whenever I think of Piper now, I can't get that Forsaken movie out of my head. And it's so bad it's good, and just him smacking a coconut over a zombie's head is just absolutely amazing. But
oh my god, I didn't know they did that.
It's
well, the stories that a lot of the guys on the indie circuit have about just Piper pulling them aside and telling him, he believes in them and stuff like that, and just how nice of a guy he was to so many people. It's a lot of people have told me those stories. Like I just a guy who I just did an article for got a hold of me and was like, I love the Piper impression, and I guess he has he was in the hospital, this guy, and he had tickets to go see Roddy Piper's comedy show with his buddy. It's like 10 years ago or whatever, and so his buddy went to the show, because the guy was in the hospital, and tells Piper like, hey, my friend was supposed to be here. You're his idol, man, and he really wanted to meet you, but he's in the hospital. But I just told him I'd tell you hello for him, and he's like, oh yeah, can you call him? Piper's like, can I talk to him? And he's like, yeah. So he gets him on the phone and talks to the kid for like 10 minutes, in the hospital, and just kind of talking to him, which is surreal, right? Like Roddy Piper is talking to you on the phone. And then at the end, because the guy who had the accident had some afflictions, and his whole life was kind of changed because of the accident. And Roddy said, you ever get scared, man? And he's like, yeah, I do, Roddy, but I'm doing my best. And he's like, well, I get scared too, but you know what? You just got to keep your head up, and you got to keep going forward anyway. And it's like, holy cow. Like, dude, like Roddy Piper just took like 20 minutes out of his day to like change somebody's life. It's amazing. Yeah. Just for him to be that candid with a stranger, just like, I get depressed, I get scared, but you know what? You got to keep going. It's like, wow, dude, like Piper's a real dude and he's really nice.
Through all I know you mentioned you're in the same locker room as Daniel Bryan and everything, but has there been a guy that you had on the pedestal before you met him or shared a locker room with him, and they just turned out to be the worst human being ever?
Well, I get a few people come to mind, but I can say first, I'll say the opposite of that, which is my first match ever. And it was February 26, 2005. I didn't even know I was going to wrestle. I was told I was going to do a battle royal, and then they told me it was a match last minute. And on that card was not only Jeff Jarrett, which who'll be there this Friday, but Dusty Rhodes was wrestling on that show. And like saying hello to Dusty Rhodes was one of the most nerve-wracking moments of my entire life, because he's just he's a normal guy. And he was so nice and so pleasant, because I said, hello, Mr. Rhodes, my name is Chris. And he's like, you can call me Virgil. And I was like, can I call you Dusty? And he was like, yeah, that's fine. Like, I can't call Dusty Rhodes Virgil. But I'll say this. I'll say this because I try not to ever bash anybody, but I'll say it because it ends happy. But I remember in 2007 being on a double shot somewhere in southern West Virginia, and they had booked the Honky Tonk Man for 2 nights in a row for this show. But the problem is they inadvertently booked, so they're in southern West Virginia, which is like a coal country, right?
Yeah.
So they booked this show on the weekend that all the coal miners have their vacation week with their family. So nobody's in town. so the first night was just like, abysmal draw compared to what it would have been, And then the second night, Honky just walks in and he's just like, he does not want to be there. Like, he is just in the worst mood, and he's just kind of like stink eyeing everybody and not talking to anybody. And it's like, oh man, that's a bummer. Like, it's like honky tonk man, and then, and all of a sudden he just disappears for like an hour. Everyone's like, where's the honky tonk man? Like, I don't know. Like, how do you lose the honky tonk man? He's like in his jumpsuit and everything, like, I don't know. And then he comes back with a large, to-go cup full of what was allegedly iced tea, but it smelled a little stronger than iced tea, and all of a sudden he is like much happier. He's like hugging people and laughing and like giving people tips and advice and stuff.
Man.
So Honky redeemed himself that night. And I think I did a show with Jake one time back when he was still like messed up and all that, and I think he was kind of rude to everybody, but he had a lot of drug problems too. But that's always disappointing, when you meet somebody who's kind of a legend and then it's like, oh man, he's all messed up on drugs or something. But again, happy story, he turned his life around. But I will say I've yet to really run into the king. So if I run into the king, Jerry Lawler, maybe I'll have a story for you.
It depends how the king feels that day. If he's in a bad mood, he just wants to get paid, do what he has to do, and leave. If he's in a good mood, he'll socialize. It's just one of those. It's just one of them. And I travel with the king for a few weekends, and every day is a new adventure with the king. When it comes to, is he going to be in a social mood, or is he just going to be in give him my money, I'll wrestle and leave mood? But no, he's great. But no, like one story, Badass Billy Gunn was AIW a couple of years ago, and he would sit there, and he had this look on his face like, the wrestling bitch face. He just didn't want anybody. It seemed like anytime someone came up to shake his hand, which is the proper way, what you do in the locker room, shake his hand, and he would just look up 1 second, look down, back at his phone. Like, he just seemed like he didn't want to be there. And I'm like, oh, this is awful, because he's one of my favorites. And back then, we were allowed to set up the podcasting equipment, and I would, my co-host and we would have some people come on that were in the locker room. It was just the easy area to do interviews. And I think Billy saw, I think Booker T was either that weekend or the weekend before, but he saw people coming over to the table and doing interviews, and he asked, like, what are you guys doing? So I explained to him. He goes, oh, okay. And then he went back to what he was doing, and I just was like, I'm just going to ask him, because sometimes you get the vibe that they don't want to be bothered. But I'm like, hey, would you want to come on and let's do an interview? He goes, well, what's it for? Blah, blah, blah. I told him. And, dude, he ended up being probably one of the best interviews I ever done in my entire life with a wrestler. And I think we did 2 hours. And we talked about, he was vaping. We talked about his whole career. We went over to the lyrics of, I'm an ass man, each lyric. We went over with a fine-tooth comb. I mean, and then we would talk wrestling and then weave into vaping and then back into wrestling and then back into the truck he just bought last weekend. Like, you were just weaving in and out. And I think it was a perfect mixture. It is for those people listening to the show for the first time, the Billy Gunn interview is a 2-part interview back on the stream. So if you guys want to go back and listen to it, I forget episode number, but it is on the RSS feed. But he is one of those guys. Ric Flair gets a bad rap when it comes to people experiencing with him, and I met him a couple of times at WrestleMania and WrestleMania, like backstage, and he's really cool. And I was with Jerry at the hotel in Cleveland after I think Fastlane 2016, and Flair was there. And I think I think it was still being Charlotte's valet, and we were at the Hyatt Regency downtown at the bar, and we walk into the restaurant portion. Here's Ric Flair sitting with Wendy and sitting with Charlotte, and Ric Flair's eating hummus, and Jerry goes up to Rick with it was Jerry and I, and we go up to Rick, and Rick is just glowing about the hummus. He just loves the hummus. He couldn't stop talking about the hummus. And he goes, King, have some of this hummus. And the king does not eat hummus. The king does not.
Right.
He eats burgers and fries and steak and whatnot. So I'm like, I'm not turning down taking hummus from Ric Flair to Nature Boy. So I'm going to try some hummus. Right. So I say it's great. And there was like nobody at this restaurant or bar, just a few other wrestlers. And so I sit down with Jerry and Lauren, his fiance, and Rick couldn't find the bathroom. I'm not sure if he was drinking or not, but he couldn't find the bathroom. So he must have walked by 4 or 5 times from our table. And every time he walked by, he would woo. So he would walk by and go, woo, and be like, where's the bathroom? I'd be like, it's over there, Rick. Woo, okay. Like he would just keep wooing. It was absolutely terrific. And I'm just, you hear stories of him being jerks to fans and, not, just wanting to get money and whatnot. But here, that's a guy that I've never had a bad experience with. So it's just, and you're, in it more deeply than I am, but, being in the same locker room as people you grew up with. And when I talk to people about that, like, what's the big deal? It's just Mick Foley or Ric Flair or The Rock and whatnot. But it's like, Saved by the Bell. If you walked in on the set of Saved by the Bell with Zach Morris and AC Slater, you would probably freak out. Like that's how I feel. I'm not sure that's how you feel when you're in the same locker room as people that you grew up watching and idolizing. It's the same exact feeling as that.
Well, it's funny because, you have to remember that they're just people. Like, they have bad days or, it's just a day when you wake up and you don't want to deal with anybody. And I know that they're in the public eye and they have to try to fake it more than others. But still, they deserve your respect and leeway in that sense that they're just people. But it's funny that you say that because, the first few names, I suppose, or legends that you wrestle, you do have that like, oh man, don't, be careful. It's a honky tonk man or like whatever it is, like it's the Dudley Boys, like, don't mess up. But then you quickly realize that like, they're just dudes or they're just people. They're just men and women, and like Mick Foley. It was really weird to look over and just see Mick Foley sitting across the locker room with everyone else. And he's just checking his phone like everybody else, or whatever. But quickly, I mean, my mentality is like, he's just a man. He's a nice guy. So I'd go over and I noticed that he kept using Purell on his hands. So I didn't shake his hand, just to kind of respect that because I can understand that. So I just kind of gave him like a little pat on the shoulder, introduced myself, and I had a couple of quick stories, just kind of chatted, and he was very personable. But I just for instance, I remember meeting Jim Cornette for the first time in like 2005 or 6 I was wrestling for the NWA convention down in Nashville, and literally I remember shaking because I was like, Jim Cornette was just like a big intimidating guy to me at the time. And I didn't want to say the wrong thing and get yelled at or or embarrass myself like Cornette. And then as soon as, 5 minutes went by and we were just talking, and then I just realized like, yeah, he's just a dude. And I've since been in many locker rooms with Cornette. And, last time he was on one of my uncle's shows. I don't get to do many of my uncle's shows, but this one lined up. And I sat and talked to Jim Cornette for like 3 hours, and just about anything. We were just kind of just like two human beings interacting who are stuck in the same building together, So it is cool once you get to that point where it's like, yeah, they're just guys. They deserve your respect, obviously, just like everyone else does. And Mick Foley's going to have an aura about him when he enters a room. But yeah, they're just people. Like just like I mean, I'm sure the first time you hung out with Jerry Lawler, it was like, oh my gosh, like, wow, it's Jerry Lawler. Now it's just Jerry to you. I'm sure, he's just another friend, So it's kind of cool to get to that point, and it's pretty surreal to stop and think about it sometimes.
Yeah, I mean that's basically. I mean, when I went to the WrestleMania after party for the first time, and I walk in and there's every single person underneath the sun for any legend or current roster, and I'm like, whew, okay, Glenn, calm down. Like, this is like walking onto the set every single like TV show that you ever worship. But it's like, don't be the fanboy. Don't be the fanboy. It's very hard because you want to go up to every single one and relive what you know from that person, but you can't. But it's still nice to know that 99% of them are actually cool in real life as the person that they are, the human being that they are, and if you just, sometimes you just have to not be shy, and I have a problem being shy. So you just, you treat them like a regular person, and they'll treat you like a regular person. It goes both ways.
Right, and I see so I see so many people like embarrassing themselves or like making the people feel uncomfortable, and it's like I feel like I could go up to Jerry Lawler and tell him that he was an important person in my childhood or whatever in a tactful way, like, hey, thank you, I really enjoyed watching you, or whatever, without being like, oh my God, my grandmammy loves you and this and that. Like, I see people do that. Like we had to kick a guy out of the locker room. Some fan or somebody or a friend of somebody had wandered into the back in Toronto, and it was just all over Foley. And then it took like 5 or 6 minutes before someone's like, do you know that guy? Do you know that guy? No, I don't know that guy. Hey, guy, can you get out of here? Like, because you never know, because Mick Foley rolls into Toronto and like the 2K Sports guys are showing up and like TSN is there and all the different channels and all the other and then Sky Sports, whatever it's called. So like you never know who's running around. It's like, well, I don't want to like upset the CEO of 2K or something, but this guy really seems like he's bothering Mick Foley. So it's just one of those things where like, yeah, like just cut it off. I could walk up to like I sat and talked with Norman Smiley for an hour, but at no point was I like, oh my God, you're the best. You
do the big wiggle. Do the big wiggle.
How'd you come up with that, man? Like, no. He wants to talk about what he's having for dinner. Or you know what? Guess what I'll talk about with Norman Smiley? Whatever the hell Norman Smiley wants to talk about.
Exactly. No, it's the one thing when a lot of people go up to like, Jerry or they'll be like, do you remember a match you had in, bumfuck Indiana in 1983? My grandma and I were there. Jerry doesn't know. And Jerry's, oh yeah, I remember that. Oh yeah. But people it's like going up to a baseball player and be like, remember that home run you had 10 years ago at the old Cleveland Stadium? It's like it's a certain point to where, yeah, it was a big moment for you, but for them, it's just another day at the office. It's just, but those are the main. But I think a lot of wrestlers, they don't sometimes they shy away from those interactions. But I feel like most of them embrace it and they deal with it, and because all it takes is saying the wrong thing can just ruin a person's perception of you for life.
Well, yeah, and now with the internet, they could tell everybody. Yeah. It's funny because, this is probably the right place to tell this since I already mentioned him. But again, the Honky Tonk Man crept up in a show I was on not that long ago, and they set up his merchandise table right beside my stuff, which was kind of odd, which is good and bad because it's kind of funny because I'm in the background of a bunch of Honky Tonk Man photos, I'm sure. But at the same time, it's like this mob of people in front of the Honky Tonk Man. But anyway, some fan came up and was just like doing that whole deal with him, just like, oh my God, like I remember you, and like you mean so much to my fan. And you could tell he just didn't know what to say. Like it was almost like at first it was like, okay, yeah, thank you, darling, and then it was just like, okay, like thank you, I appreciate it, but like how do I respond to all this? And then here's what he did. She finally said, can I take a selfie with you? And he looked at her and he said, yep, $10, darling. And she goes, $10. And she tries to get out her wallet. He's like, in God we trust. And then he looks back at me and goes, and that's all I trust, and winked at me.
Oh, the Honky Tonk Man.
It was like I just shared the weirdest moment with the Honky Tonk Man.
Oh my God. It's just and like being around Lawler, I have those moments too. Like I just at WrestleCon last year, JR and the King were signing, and I was handling T-shirts, and Virgil was the booth next to us, and it was like it was a corner booth, so his booth was around the corner, so like my back was to him, and all I remember is this black hand on my shoulder, and he gets really close to me and he goes, it's good getting that fuck money with the King, isn't it?
Oh my God. Oh my God.
And I was like, yeah. I'm like, yes. Just shared
I had a few interactions with Virgil. One of my favorites is I was booked on a fair show in Pennsylvania like 10 years ago, and they had Virgil there on the show, and he showed up in every bit of NWO merchandise they ever sold. It was like the beanie sock thing hanging down, and like the shirt and a jacket, and he literally ran to the ring with an NWO flag, like how they would run when they won Global Cuts, when they'd run around the track, like with the flag. You had NWO sweatpants, the whole thing. And this is like, and again, this is like 2007 or something. So we're pretty well removed from the NWO. And I'm standing in the back, and just to add to the scene, I'm standing there talking to Demolition Axe, right? So I'm standing there with Axe, and we're just kind of talking. And then Virgil just kind of creeps up. And again, I'm in full wrestling attire, spandex panties, the boots, everything. I'm obviously clearly a wrestler. And I'm there with a man with a 60-year-old man with his face painted like Demolition Axe. He's obviously we're obviously wrestlers. Virgil creeps up, and I just kind of see him standing there. And I'm like, oh, hi. I kind of shake his hand. I'm like, nice to meet you. And he shakes my hand. And he's like, yeah, Vincent, because he's being Vincent that night. I was like, all right. Like, nice to meet you. I was like, so how you been? Like, I didn't know what to say because he's still standing there. And all of a sudden he goes, yeah, just checking out, around this fair, because we're in Pennsylvania. And I was like, oh, yeah, well, great to have you here, man. I'm excited to see you. He's like, yeah, Hollywood sent me down on some NWO business. And I'm like looking around thinking, like, are there like some fans in behind me? Like, no, there's all just a bunch of wrestlers. I'm like, oh, cool, man. Like,
Oh my God. Hollywood set me down.
oh yeah, Hollywood sent him to the middle of nowhere Pennsylvania fair to find out some NWO business.
God. That dude just is a living gimmick, and his post on Instagram though. I mean, he lives at 100%, 120%. I mean, if that's the way he wants to go, he goes for it. He doesn't back down. But that's a great story. Hollywood sent me down.
Yeah, I'm not one of the 8-year-olds here who's gonna believe that, dude. Like,
oh my God, Hollywood sent you down. Hogan sent you down.
Wow. You had me check out the funnel cakes, brother.
By the way, this interaction will cost you $20, brother. Give me.
All right. Right. That's what someone tweeted out a picture from that weekend with the honky tonk man. I'm in the background talking to someone, and someone was like, "I'm surprised Honky didn't charge you $5 for being in the background."
Oh my God! I wanted to take a selfie with Virgil, and he knew I was with Lawler, so I figured, I was even scared. I'm not afraid to ask for selfies when I'm with Lawler with like other wrestlers. Like I'd rather have a selfie or a picture than an autograph, but I don't like King doesn't care. But with Virgil, I feel like even though I knew the King and he knew I was with him, that he would probably still charge me for a picture with Virgil, even if it was like a quick selfie. So I took a quick one of those quick photos, like sneak a photo of him in the background. So I tweeted it out, and someone says, "Well, if he finds out who you are, he's gonna probably make you PayPal him $20."
Oh, yeah, he's gonna ask for the PayPal, brother.
But that's terrific. Well, I feel like we can go on for another hour, man. So we're gonna wrap up here at the 1 hour mark. I really appreciate you coming on the show. I feel like we need to have you on. Well, I need to have you on again in the future. And if I'm not there Friday, I'm sure I'll run into you in the near future.
Oh, I really appreciate it. I'd love to come back anytime you like to have me, man. I really enjoy doing things like this, especially when it's as easy as this.
Thanks to Magnum CK for coming on and being the first guest of the return. This is Awesome Wrestling Show. I think we'll drop a new episode every Thursday. I have a new guest each and every week, and a little bit talk about the current events like I did today, but also I want to also delve into kind of like the behind the scenes of Dinner with a King with Jerry Lawler, because we usually sit there. I mean, we put out a show that's probably an hour and a half long. Our initial point of the show that we wanted, the mark of the show was going to be around a half an hour, 40 minutes, but that has turned into a lot more because we usually talk and Jerry talks, and then he realizes we're talking way too much. We're on the phone for a good 3 hours, and I want to delve into what it is like to talk with the King, and some of the things we don't doesn't make it the final cut into the podcast. So from time to time, if something big happens, or we try to get a guest, or there's some conversations that don't make the final cut of the Dinner with the King podcast, maybe I'll throw on here and give you a treat of some behind the scenes podcast action here on This Is Awesome Wrestling Show. So I really appreciate you guys tuning in. Tell your friends, tweet the show at TIA Wrestling. And make sure you resubscribe. I'm excited to be back. I'm excited to interview some guests for the show. Get to know some new people. Get some old faces back on the show. And I'm really looking forward to each and every week bringing you the This Is Awesome Wrestling Show. And I might even do some watch-alongs too. I know watch-alongs with like old pay-per-views and old Raws and SmackDowns, and I love actually watching those and actually watching a Raw and a SmackDown leading up to a pay-per-view back in the Attitude Era. So I might do some watch-alongs and might bring some friends who are big into wrestling that actually love the Attitude Era, and recording a watch-along. And how those work is we would, for example, watch like WrestleMania 18, which was like Rock and Hogan, and we'll watch it. And what you can do is, it's like we're doing like a DVD commentary for a movie, is you hit play for the podcast, hit play on the network or the pay-per-view, and you can have our thoughts and humor for the show as the pay-per-view goes on. So that could be another idea. So I love the watch-along idea, so I might be doing that. Might do it solo, might bring on some friends. That will make it a little more interesting. So look for that too. I would love to do that. So let me know what your thoughts are. If you have any comments or concerns or just anything to throw my way, you can follow me on Twitter at GlenmoreCLE. Also TIA Wrestling for the podcast show. We're on podavenue.com/TIAWS. You can find some interviews from the past, some direct links there. And like I said, thanks to Magnum CK for coming on the show. We'll be back next week. Really excited. I'm pumped to get this first one underneath the belt. Let's get this thing rolling. Get this thing back on the track, baby. This is Awesome Wrestling Show. I'll see you guys next week.
The preceding show is a Pod Avenue production.